When I warn about buffing Junkrat into top tier relevance, a lot of players, especially high-end ones, respond as if I don't know he's a gimmicky pub stomper hero. I'm fully aware of that fact. I'm just concerned that Blizzard balancing the way they are often ignores the average player's game experience, and someone's got to speak up for them. Despite me thinking Junkrat was an underrated pub stomper in Beta 1, they buffed him in Beta 2 to have significantly bigger hitboxes, which makes him a lot easier to play. But the reason this is a problem is because it does little to affect his higher tier viability, while making him much more obnoxious in the tiers he was already good at. In today's video, I want to continue to expand my thoughts on Junkrat's playstyle and explain in further detail the growing rift between the pub stomper class of hero and the top tier or team-based styles of hero in Overwatch 2, and how Blizzard can avoid ruining the balance of the game for either category of play. Today's video sponsor is Skillshare. I love Skillshare because it helps me improve at every aspect of doing YouTube. I've already used it to upgrade my skills at the very annoying but necessary difficult software such as OBS, Adobe Premiere, Adobe Photoshop, but this time I wanted to tackle one of my biggest fears, believe it or not, speaking on camera. Nathaniel Drew is a YouTuber with over 1 million subscribers, and his class on how to speak confidently on camera was filled with great insight.
If you are like me, you should definitely take the time to write out your thoughts. This is a skill that you can build and develop, and you just have to go to the gym and do it over and over again.
All right, fine. You're right. Okay, I get it. But no matter what your area of interest or need, Skillshare will have classes designed specifically for you. New premium classes are added each week, and with ad-free viewing, you can stay in the zone and binge watch as much as you need. Don't delay. Take our link in the description right now, and the first 1,000 of you to use our code YourOverwatch at checkout will get 1 free month of Skillshare. Try out Skillshare, use our code YourOverwatch, and begin your personal growth journey today. Also, I'll be showing off some of my best Junkrat gameplay from the beta. I'm the only maniac who played him enough to make a video such as this, so you're welcome. Despite me having criticism here, overall, I like the pub stomping aspect of Overwatch 2, where by playing aggressive, you can get a lot of value out of what otherwise would be deemed a niche off-meta hero, and that's a cool thing. I just don't want it to get out of hand or be good for the wrong reasons. The fastest way I can explain it, I think, is that in Overwatch 2, Junkrat is most similar to Doomfist from Overwatch 1. He has some obnoxious kills that really only catch out the mainstream player, which is, everyone, numerically speaking, but his playstyle, just like Doom in Overwatch 1, would get clowned at higher tiers of play and in team play, which creates a very interesting problem for Blizzard. How do you boost the performance of a character whose playstyle has that big of a gap? That's not a stat-based problem, it's a player knowledge and skill tier meta problem. Too much power to get him into viability at the higher end makes them pub stomp harder for the average player, which is exactly what I'm trying to avoid. I think some people get confused when I say strict top-down balancing isn't good for Overwatch because their knee-jerk reaction is like, wait, what? Surely balancing for players that can play makes sense, right? Well, yeah, in theory, I agree, but that's not what we get in Overwatch in practice. In Overwatch, the devs try to force heroes into positions in the meta with a heavy-handed way, and it often has the opposite side effect of what they intend. The best example of this is when they buffed Reaper in the GOATS era, a hero that did nothing versus the immortal GOATS comp when played with coordination, but Reaper was already strong for most players, or at least good, and none of them were playing against GOATS. It was just like 1% of players maybe. So the buff resulted in a double whiff. It did nothing for the top meta, and it just made Reaper unkillable for the average player, and they had to revert it. A very similar problem happens when Junkrat is simply more forgiving with the size of his hitbox on his projectiles, and I'm unsure why Blizzard would go down this specific road at all. Earlier, I compared Junkrat to Doomfist, and the reason why I love this comparison is because both the Overwatch 1 Doom and Junk are a harsh skill floor punish check. In Doom's case, most of the not dying to him is knowing how to get map control and avoid the death zone engages. Junkrat can replicate that in Overwatch 2, getting a position that looks like a Batman Arkham Asylum dive from a gargoyle into your backline, nuke something, then get out, very similar to Doomfist in Overwatch 1. And the mistake from the team point of view is the same. You didn't clear the map. You walked down a low ground lane without checking and clearing the high ground flanks or being aware of them, or whatever crazy rollout either of them can do. This type of adding chaos to the mix of a team fight is the type of thing that a coordinated team would be communicating all the time, but is much more effective in 5v5 when there isn't two tanks to play around. So the characters that get nuked and are like the weak link of the team comp get focused easier. I mean, we all know this, right? Support players felt helpless in beta 1, and even with buff after buff, still kind of think that they're helpless in beta 2, despite high tier players knowing that there's a bigger ceiling. But the thing that they got to realize is a lot of that comes with the map control that high tier gameplay gets overall. And the lower down the skill curve you go, the more these pub stompy int at you type characters see success. And then on top of that, an aspect of gameplay that the average player struggles with so much that almost no top player ever does is movement and projectile avoidance while traversing the map. See, if you're less decisive on where to go, or getting information about where the fight even is taking place, where you need to be, there's a lot more wandering around and opening yourself up to lines of sight that you just wouldn't ever do at higher tiers that Junkrat punishes, and it's such a lame way to play the game. I feel so bad for players wandering out just to see the map and get bombarded by these massive tree trunk projectiles that Blizzard buffed into existence. My problem with it isn't that I don't want Junk to be good. I love playing Junk and getting free SR, but the way he's good in punishing that type of mistake is just lame. And we all know this because they went to address this in other balance patches in Overwatch 1 at different points. There was a attempted fall off damage from range they did at one point. But the main reason I'm trying to get ahead of this conversation now is because with the percentage of the content creator and viewer base of the game shifting more towards high tier gameplay, I feel somebody's got a voice for the average player who doesn't want to deal with this BS. Maybe they'll just brush it off with a get good style attitude, but I see the pain points, and I just don't think anybody wants to get blind spam killed turning a corner from across the map. It's not fun, and it's way easier to do when the projectiles are that forgiving. Taking a step back a bit, I think this principle is going to apply to a lot of characters in Overwatch 2, and something I'm really interested in, and I expect to happen more with good and negative elements, but there's going to be much harsher gaps in performance between heroes that are pub stompers versus team heroes. In Overwatch, maximizing teamwork is always going to be the best at higher tiers because of the force multiplier and the power you can get, but that requires a pre-made team. And in pubs, that amplified power effect just doesn't really get actualized. And a lot of coaches I've heard agree with me on this point and even take it one step further to say it doesn't even happen in top 500, right? It requires a pre-made team. So it's a big mistake, I think, to tune the numbers of the game for the gameplay that is achievable in a pre-made when the rest of us play outside of a pre-made. Now, we know tournaments and stuff are coming down the line. That's great. But you see my point. The best example for me recently would be Junkrat, where that very first patch turned out to be the most oppressive team-based ability we may have ever seen with Commanding Shout. They nerfed it down already, but it's interesting to think about what made it so oppressive. Commanding Shout, giving a speed boost to the team as well as instant health, did two things. It meant that your whole team could act as tanks, similar to the playstyle of GOATs, and with that extra health, as long as you played aggressive enough with teamwork, you could maximize a massive stat advantage and overwhelm the enemy if they don't have Commanding Shout. Now, in theory, I thought there might be a gap for you to disengage from an all-in playstyle like that, but it turns out because the only extra speed boost in the game is on Junkrat as well, the best way to disengage from that exact style of all-in is with your own Junkrat. So whether you want to play aggressive or defensive, Junkrat was the answer. And they nerfed it, so we can't be too upset. But ultimately, the big comparison point I want to point to is like no one in matchmaking was maximizing that, right? That's a whole thing that is only from pre-mades, requiring communication and practice. And if you don't commit during that Commanding Shout extra health, I think it's significantly worse. So what we're describing here is that in Overwatch 2, the team play elements are significantly harder to reproduce with randoms. So because of that, there's a gap in what I'm going to call not just a pub stomper type hero, but maybe even one step further, I'm going to borrow from tac shooters and say an entry fragger style hero. This is where I think Junkrat fits in, where characters that easily can int in and take advantage of a small little gap of map control or peeling for the team or just missing the mark on something have a disproportionate boost to pub stomping gameplay, which those types of shenanigans just kind of get marked out with teamwork. And this goes to explain some elements of Overwatch 2 that I like so much. The team comps and team fights in Overwatch 1 at all tiers had a lot of components in order to keep you safe. This is what then caused the poke at the choke meta, plat level gameplay, no one really committing in, then you get ultimates, and that's the thing that determines the fight. Now, funnily enough, high tier gameplay also turns into that. Not because people don't commit, but because there's so many responses and ways to mark the map and use teamwork to survive. With high level positioning, that sort of was the thing too. If you've seen any clips from Seagull recently talking about the comparison between Overwatch 1 and 2, this is often what he says. In Overwatch 1, at high levels even, the most optimal playstyle was to gain the better ground, and let's say both teams have as good of ground as they can get, look to pressure, but due to the defenses of the game, there wasn't really openings, and then use ultimates when you get them to actually create engages. So it required the ultimates a lot of times in order to break a lot of stalemates. Now fast forward to Overwatch 2. At high-level gameplay, those same stalemates happen, but they happen in a way that reminds me more of attack shooter, or maybe even Call of Duty, where the damage threat of, let's say, like a hit scan, looking down a lane, funnels where the enemy can move on the map, which is why also in a lot of Overwatch League games, meta depending, it often comes down to whose hit scan is popping off that has the biggest impact, at least in the first two balance patches we've seen in the Overwatch League, because that same stalemate is happening minus one defensive character, so the leverage often comes from one of the DPS. But in public matchmaking in 5v5, that map control neutral game just kind of doesn't exist until you reach tiers where players know how to clear all the spots of the map, which might one day be a thing most players understand, but you kind of didn't need to do it in Overwatch 1 because the team comps themselves protect you anyway. You weren't as reliant on clearing every little hidey hole or mastering every threat angle because most games you were just safe from that. So it's not something the community learned. This opens that lane for pub stomper style characters that can create chaos and take advantage of a different style of leverage, the pub stomper one, where surprise flanks and taking advantage of that knowledge gap on the map has massive rewards. Because getting a pick matters in Overwatch 2 surprisingly more than it did in Overwatch 1. This is a new thing that I don't think I predicted, but in the same way that it's very difficult to figure out who's supposed to be on the objective at any given point in Overwatch 2, it's also difficult to win any fight underhanded and regain more map. That might sound like an odd thing to hear, considering everyone keeps talking about all the individual player agency, pop-off potential, and carry potential, but I think I've worked out the reason for that discrepancy. The Overwatch League has taken stats on this. First pick in a team fight is way more valuable in Overwatch 2 than 1. I think that stands to reason because comps are more asymmetrical in Overwatch 2, but there's still gaps to get exit frags, which do end up mattering to the next team fight, which I'm sure is hard for them to track. And here's the kicker, okay? The big benefit of the entry fragger style of play in Overwatch, whichever hero you think fits that mold for you, is that getting those exit kills, even in lost fights, will always keep that asymmetric team comp brake pedal on. Even with all 5 players, it's sort of odd who pushes the objective, who can take high ground, who can afford to be set up. You just don't have the wealth of a team to fully lock down the map easily, even with your full team. And pro teams, and a lot of pro coaches have been talking about this, is that it's difficult to figure out who's supposed to be on the objective, who can take high ground, who do we set up, who do we give resources. So much so that there's a lot more C9s or failing to touch the objective in a crucial moment and losing the game because of it than there was in Overwatch 1. It's a much more common occurrence, not because the players are bad, but just because of the way the game works. And also, I'll note a problem for the push game mode in particular, where due to this aspect of the game, anytime you win a fight but lose a member, you kind of have to just regroup with your bad spawns as opposed to push forward with the robot into a disadvantaged fight because you can't set up anyway. So you might as well just soft reset and get a little bit of progress rather than do what most pickup game players would do, which is keep pressing forward and fight in that chaos. But it doesn't matter what is optimal. It's about what works, right? And as players make that trickle in mistake, the aggressive, kamikaze, predictable, but offensive style can be quite good. And maybe at the end of the day, at the end of this entire video, we're fine with Junkrat having this playstyle. And I don't necessarily think this is what they should take away. I just think it shouldn't be so easy to do. Because despite all these buffs, the Sojourns and Pharahs and Genjis and Tracers of the world will still dominate the top tier DPS category because they can do all of this as easily if you have better mechanics. It's just that I suck and I could do it with Junk with much worse mechanics. And I just think it's a shortcut to that domineering carry DPS playstyle in the same way that Doomfist in Overwatch 1 had kills on a cooldown that, yeah, he's easy to counter at high tiers, but at lower tiers, he sort of just like rears up, launches himself into your team, and whoops, I killed someone. It's just kind of lame, isn't it? When a lot of the game is moving the other direction. Other things I haven't had a chance to mention, but it's been discussed a bit, where like the knockback effects in Overwatch 2, at least so far, they've been changed, and I don't know if it's been deliberate in a global patch note for all the heroes, or if it's just Junkrat. I'm a little confused on this, but Junk's concussion mine knockback is significantly better than it was in Overwatch 1. So much so that you see me flying across the map with 2 mines, much farther than it was before. I also think it must be why I feel I can move tanks a bit more than I probably should be able to. And with all that considered, I feel like he does a lot. All right, so I laid all my arguments out on the table, establishing why this is a problem. What do I think Blizzard should do in the end with a character like Junk? Well, I think it would be a mistake to buff him into relevancy at higher tiers. All those other carry DPS picks I mentioned are much more entertaining for top tier players to play, and we surely don't want to see them play easier heroes. We already saw that a bit with Sojourn pre-nerf. They made the size of her snipe fire quite forgiving, so much so that I actually thought Junk was worse in beta 2 than he was in beta 1 because everyone was playing Sojourn, who's a lot harder of a matchup for Junk to take on because she flies through the air while she runs away and can load up a one-hit kill on you, flush out your camping spots with her nade. I much preferred going up against Soldier in beta 1 every game, where his spike damage just wasn't as good, and he's easier to hit on the ground. The hitbox issue is the same on both these characters. Like, the game should reward aim on aim-dependent heroes. And Junk, to me, isn't an aim-dependent hero. Instead, he's a gimmicky character where most his value is around his concussion mines, maneuvering around the map and setting up for corny kills. That's good enough for me. As a fan. At the end of it all, I think Blizzard would make a mistake to have 2 quick knee-jerk reactions to the pros' responses about balance, because we've already seen them overreact about a character like Winston, then a few small tweaks, and all of a sudden he's super meta. And although Junker Queen was obviously a problem, is she more of a numbers problem or a playstyle problem, where having speed and extra healing on one ability on the tank role is just too much extra support as a concept? And I'm a bit afraid if they overreact with nerfs to those types of fun new elements they're adding to the game, well, then it just makes them kind of lame and boring for the rest of us. So they're in a really tricky situation because they want all tiers to be viable at the same time. But I think in reality, what they should try to do is try to make the top level the least obnoxious it can be, and to not try to save a cornier hero like Junkrat from the pits of despair in the metal ranks, and just let him be a weaker pick at higher tiers. Why, oh why, would we want to see Tree Trunk Junkrat be a thing at higher tiers? The projectile size shouldn't be so big that you think you're dodging it, but it hits you anyway. I think even my higher tier ranked friends would agree with me on that point. Like in beta 2, against tanks, especially when Discord and Zen was powerful in the back, it's just almost hilarious the free tank damage Junk could rack up. At least make him aim at you, right? Like he shouldn't have to hit his shots. All right, I think that's about all I have to say about this subject. I could go on about other cute playstyle things you can do with Overwatch 2 with this aggressive timing-based playstyle. It's very similar to Reaper teleporting around the map, but I think we'll wait to get more in depth when we finally get a ranked mode in 2025. That's a joke. I don't know when it's coming out. Because then we can be more in depth on how I'm reading these timings and getting the most out of what's supposed to be, and I keep getting told is a weak character, but reading the openings is like half the battle. So I'm sure you can already learn a bit of that from watching the gameplay, but we have more in terms of general and hero-specific guides coming up with the launch of Overwatch 2. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave it a like. It really does help us out and lets us know that you're enjoying the content. And if you haven't already, click subscribe and be sure to click the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos go live. You can support us by supporting our sponsor, Skillshare. The first 1,000 of you to click the link in the description will get a free month. So hurry up and sign up right now and start your journey of personal development today. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.